Welcome back to Godless and Grounded. Throughout history, religion has presented itself as a source of truth, morality, and guidance. Yet, when you take a closer look, you'll find that many of the core ideas within religions don't just conflict with science or reason. They often conflict with themselves. These contradictions aren't small details that you can brush off. They're massive, glaring differences that completely change the meaning of the belief. And surprisingly, these contradictions exist in almost every major religion, not just between different faiths, but within the same holy books, teachings, and traditions. Let's start with one of the biggest contradictions found in many religions: the idea of an all-loving, all-powerful God who allows immense suffering. If God is all-powerful, he could stop suffering at any moment. If he is all-loving, he would want to stop it. Yet, according to religious teachings, he doesn't. This is explained away with phrases like, "it's a test," or "God works in mysterious ways." But if you apply that same logic to a human being, it becomes absurd. Imagine a parent who has the power to stop their child from being tortured, but says, "I'll allow it to teach them a lesson." We wouldn't call that loving. We'd call it cruel. The contradiction here is that God is supposedly perfect in love and morality, yet his actions, or rather his lack of action, don't reflect that at all. Another major contradiction is the claim that God never changes and is eternally consistent, yet religious texts show him changing his mind repeatedly. In some parts of the Bible, for instance, God regrets creating humans. In others, he changes decisions after people plead with him. If God is perfect and all-knowing, he would have known the outcome of every decision before making it. Changing his mind implies imperfection. Either he didn't foresee the consequences or he made a mistake. Both options clash with the claim of divine perfection. Then there's the contradiction about free will. Many religions insist that humans have the freedom to choose right or wrong, and that's why we're held accountable for our actions. Yet the same teachings also say God has a divine plan and knows everything that will ever happen. If the future is already set, how can we truly have free will? It's like saying a movie has already been filmed, but the actors are still free to change the ending. You can't have both. Either life is predetermined, or we genuinely have the power to alter the future. Religious explanations try to mix both ideas together, but they don't fit. A related contradiction is the belief in God's mercy and justice. These two qualities are often presented as perfectly balanced in God. But mercy means forgiving people who deserve punishment, while justice means giving them exactly what they deserve. They're opposites. You can't give someone the full punishment they deserve and also forgive them for it at the same time. In human courts, if a judge says, "I sentence you to life in prison, but I also forgive you," that forgiveness is meaningless if the punishment is still carried out. Yet in many religious doctrines, God is said to punish people eternally for finite sins while still being merciful. Another famous contradiction is the way holy books handle morality. Religious leaders often say that morality comes from God and that his rules are absolute. Yet, those same books contain moral commands that completely contradict each other. In one part, killing is forbidden. In another, God commands mass killings. There are rules about compassion, then passages that promote slavery, genocide, or discrimination. If morality is absolute, it can't change depending on the situation. Yet, in religion, morality often seems to shift depending on who's being targeted and what message the leaders want to send. One striking example is how some religions claim that God values life above all else, yet glorify stories where God kills or orders the killing of thousands of people. If life is sacred, why would the giver of life take it away in such large numbers? And if the answer is that those people deserved it, then the concept of unconditional love and forgiveness is instantly broken. You can't have unconditional love and conditions for survival. Another contradiction that's worth pointing out is the idea of God's perfection and self-sufficiency. Many faiths teach that God doesn't need anything. He is complete in himself. Yet they also say God created humans so that we could worship him. But if he doesn't need anything, why does he require constant praise, prayer, and obedience? That sounds less like perfection and more like insecurity. If a perfect being is entirely self-sufficient, then worship should be meaningless to him. Yet, according to religion, failing to worship is one of the worst offenses. We also see contradictions in the way religious rules are applied. For example, many religious traditions forbid lying, calling it a sin. But in those same traditions, lying is considered acceptable in certain situations, especially if it's for God's cause or to protect the faith. In Islam, there's a concept where deception is permitted under specific circumstances. In Christianity, some believers justify lying to protect their church from criticism. This creates a double standard. Lying is bad unless it benefits the religion. That's not moral consistency, that's convenience. And then there's the contradiction in how sin and salvation are handled. In some doctrines, salvation is entirely based on faith, not works. In others, it's based on works, not just faith. Sometimes it's both, and sometimes the same holy book will send different messages in different passages. In Christianity, for example, Paul's letters emphasize faith alone, while the book of James says faith without works is dead. So which is it? If the rules for salvation aren't even consistent within the same religion, how can anyone be sure they're on the right path? Religious beliefs about the afterlife are also riddled with contradictions. Some teachings say heaven is a place of perfect peace and joy. But if people in heaven are aware that loved ones are suffering in hell, how could they be truly happy? Others say you won't remember your loved ones in the afterlife, which creates another problem. If you lose all memory of your earthly life, then you're not really you anymore. It would be like replacing you with a different person who happens to share your name. So, the promise of eternal joy is either incomplete or comes at the cost of your identity. Another contradiction appears in the way God's morality is portrayed over time. Many religions claim that God's laws are eternal and unchanging, yet history shows these laws evolving. Dietary rules, dress codes, sacrificial rituals, all of these have shifted or been abandoned over the centuries. In Christianity, Old Testament laws about food, clothing, and circumcision are no longer followed by most believers, even though Jesus supposedly said he came not to abolish the law. In Islam, some earlier Quranic verses were replaced by later ones through a process called abrogation. If God's laws are perfect, why would they need updating or replacing? Religious prophecy is another area full of contradictions. Predictions in holy texts are often vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways, and when they fail, they are reinterpreted rather than admitted to be wrong. Some prophecies even contradict each other directly. In Christianity, some passages suggest Jesus would return within the lifetime of his disciples. Obviously, that didn't happen. So believers now reinterpret those verses to mean something symbolic. But if God wanted to be clear, why speak in ways that could be so easily misunderstood? Perhaps one of the most ironic contradictions is the claim that religion brings peace, while history shows it has been one of the greatest sources of conflict. From the Crusades to modern-day terrorism, people have killed in the name of the very faiths that preach, "Love thy neighbor" and "Do not kill." Religious leaders often respond by saying, "Those people misunderstood the religion." But if the message of peace can be so easily twisted into violence by millions over centuries, maybe the problem is with the message itself. We also see contradictions in prayer. Believers are told that God already knows their needs before they ask. Yet, they're also told to pray constantly and specifically. If God's will is perfect and unchanging, then prayer can't change it. And if prayer does change God's mind, then his plan wasn't perfect in the first place. This leaves us with the strange idea of a perfect being who requires constant reminders from imperfect humans. Another contradiction that stands out is the belief that God is everywhere, all the time, and yet in certain places he is supposedly more present than others. People travel thousands of miles to holy sites, thinking their prayers will be heard more clearly there. But if God is truly omnipresent, why would location matter at all? It's like saying the internet is available everywhere, but your Wi-Fi only works in a special room. If God's presence is equal in all places, then a prayer in your bedroom should be just as effective as one at a sacred temple or holy city. Then there's the contradiction surrounding religious exclusivity. Many religions teach that they alone hold the truth and that all others are wrong. But here's the catch. This is exactly what every other religion says about itself. If two religions make opposite truth claims, they can't both be correct. For example, Christianity teaches that salvation is only through Jesus, while Islam teaches that believing Jesus is the Son of God is a sin. Both can't be true at the same time. Yet both religions claim divine origin. This is a logical dead end. Either one is wrong or both are. We also see contradictions in the concept of miracles. Believers are told that God can suspend the laws of nature at will, yet he only seems to do so in rare, selective, and often unverifiable cases. Historical miracles are accepted without question, even though there's no concrete evidence for them, while modern miracles are often explained away as coincidences or medical anomalies. If God can heal a person's illness in an instant, why not heal all sick people in hospitals right now? The contradiction lies in claiming God is both compassionate and powerful, yet consistently selective in applying that compassion. Another famous contradiction is in how religious leaders interpret holy texts. Scriptures are said to be clear and perfect, yet entire denominations exist because people can't agree on what they mean. If God wanted to give humanity a clear guide, why write it in a way that leads to thousands of competing interpretations? Imagine a country where the laws are so unclear that every judge interprets them differently. That's not a sign of perfection, but of poor communication. One particularly troubling contradiction appears in how some religions define morality in terms of obedience. Many faiths teach that something is good because God commands it, and bad because he forbids it. But this leads to a serious logical problem. If morality is just following orders, then God could command something cruel, and it would still be considered good. And in fact, holy books do contain commands to commit acts that most of us would consider deeply immoral, such as killing unbelievers or stoning people for trivial offenses. So the contradiction is clear. Morality is presented as absolute and unchanging, but in practice, it changes based on what the deity commands in different situations. The idea of forgiveness is another area full of contradictions. In many religions, sins can be forgiven if you repent sincerely. But some sins are considered unforgivable, like blasphemy or rejecting the faith. If forgiveness is truly unconditional, then no sin should be beyond it. Yet religious texts often have a special list of sins that can't be pardoned. This turns the concept of boundless mercy into something with fine print. Another contradiction appears when religions talk about equality. Many preach that all humans are equal in the eyes of God. Yet, the same texts and traditions often place men above women, believers above non-believers, and sometimes one race or tribe above others. The idea of equality is repeatedly undermined by rules and stories that promote hierarchy. For example, women in some religious communities are not allowed to lead prayers, speak in certain gatherings, or even make basic decisions without male permission. That's not equality, it's the opposite. The belief in divine testing also creates contradictions. If God is all-knowing, then he already knows how every person will respond in every situation. So why test them? The idea of a test only makes sense if the tester doesn't already know the outcome. Yet religions often claim God tests people to see if they are faithful. This makes no logical sense if God's knowledge is truly infinite. And then there's the contradiction between God's supposed perfection and the imperfect messengers he chooses. Prophets are described as moral examples, yet many of them commit acts that would be considered wrong by today's moral standards, and even by their own religion's rules. Some prophets kill, steal, or take multiple wives without consent. If God is perfect and wants to send a perfect message, why not choose people who perfectly represent that morality? The concept of eternal punishment is one of the harshest contradictions of all. If God is just, then the punishment should fit the crime. But in many religions, a person can commit a finite number of sins in a short lifetime and be punished for eternity. That's infinite punishment for finite actions. Imagine a judge sentencing a shoplifter to life imprisonment without parole. That would be considered extreme and unjust. Yet in religion, this is considered justice. Another interesting contradiction is in the idea of God's invisibility. Many holy books say no one can see God and live, or that God cannot be physically seen. Yet in other parts of the same texts, people are said to have seen God face to face. Some prophets describe walking with him, eating with him, or wrestling with him. Both cannot be true. Either God can be seen or he can't. The notion of original sin in Christianity is also contradictory. The idea is that all humans inherit sin from Adam and Eve, even though they had no part in that original act. This is like punishing every single child in a school because two kids broke the rules thousands of years ago. At the same time, Christianity teaches that each person is responsible for their own sins. You can't logically claim that people are both responsible only for their own actions and also guilty of someone else's from the dawn of time. One of the more practical contradictions is about wealth and poverty. Many religions teach that greed and materialism are bad, that riches can distract from spiritual life. Yet religious institutions often accumulate massive wealth, build luxurious places of worship, and adorn leaders with gold and fine clothing. The same faiths that preach humility often live in the opposite way at the organizational level. Religious freedom is another tricky contradiction. Some religions claim to value it, so long as it means the freedom to choose their religion. In practice, many faiths historically punished or even executed people for leaving or rejecting the faith. This is the opposite of freedom. It's forced belief. And forced belief, by definition, isn't genuine belief at all. And finally, perhaps the most universal contradiction is the idea that faith is both a gift and a choice. Many believers say that faith is something God gives to you. You either have it or you don't, but in the next breath, they'll say, you're morally responsible for choosing to believe. If it's truly a gift, then those who don't believe simply never received it, and punishing them for that would be unjust. If it's a choice, then it's something you develop through evidence and reasoning. Yet religions often discourage questioning, which is necessary for making a real choice. When you put all these contradictions side by side, you start to see a pattern. Many religious beliefs try to hold on to two ideas at once, even when those ideas cancel each other out. This is why, throughout history, religious leaders have had to come up with complicated explanations, reinterpretations, and excuses to keep these contradictions alive. But the more you examine them, the more they reveal just how fragile the foundations of these beliefs really are. Because here's the simple truth. If something is true, it should be consistent. It shouldn't require mental gymnastics to make sense. And if a belief system is filled with contradictions that can't be resolved without changing the definitions of words, ignoring inconvenient facts, or bending logic, then maybe it's time to ask, what's holding it together? Is it truth, or is it just tradition and fear of letting go?